Hey, everybody, welcome to Vision Tech Perspectives. This is Dave Swain, Vision Technology Management. And as usual, love to bring in the co-host, Doug Johnson. Doug, how you doing today?
I'm good, Dave, and excited to be back.
Fantastic. Well, we're holding with a little bit of new uh, changes in our podcast. Jay Akridge with Purdue University. Jay, welcome.
Thanks, Dave. Hey, great to be here with you and Doug today. Yeah, so on the faculty here in agricultural economics at Purdue, but just back from 16 years in administration, also at Purdue. I was dean of ag for a number of years and then provost at the university for about 6. And glad to be back in the classroom and picking up some research projects. But prior to that administrative sabbatical, I spent about 25 years on the faculty here in agricultural economics.
Well, it's kind of scary that I remember when you came on staff. So that tells both of us where we stand, right?
Yeah, we've known each other for a number of years, Dave.
And that is because things are moving so quickly. I mean, you look at, used to, not even 5 years ago, 6 years ago, drones were the they were in their hype cycle.
Right.
So, everybody was excited about it, and then it completely dropped off, and now it's a business. Now, we're moving from auto steering to autonomy, whether it's manned autonomy or complete autonomy.
Right.
The biologicals. How does a university, and in your case, you're going to talk about it from Purdue's perspective of it, but how does a university look at any one of those things and say, yeah, that's the one we need to look at? And I know part of it, like you just said, was expertise.
Sure.
Who's there and what they're doing and what their focus is. But also, how do you look at something, and I'll use biologicals as an example, because I know you guys were just Purdue was on a team that did some research on them. But how do you decide, yeah, that's the one we're going to deal with? Because biologicals is, I mean, right now there's 1,200 biologicals companies out there. And so how do you decide, yeah, that's the horse we're going to ride and do the research on versus, all of the other things that are out there?
Yeah. Well, so I mean, and it probably could drop into two buckets. You got one group of folks, say over in my field, ag econ, that is trying to do their very best to stay on top of these at a broad level, to just assess the trends and where these things are going in general. So there's a lot of focus on that. And I think more broadly too, being charged as a land grant, having to stay engaged with our stakeholders is, it really provides a ground truthing that's awfully important. I mean, those ongoing conversations tell you a lot about, where things seem to be going, which ones seem to be getting traction, et cetera. So there's a piece of it that's involved, with just the engagement mission and staying connected to the farmer, to the ag business community and what they're thinking about. But again, a lot of this comes back to your human talent on the campus and the faculty member and their areas of expertise. And one of the things that I think has been helpful to us here is not limiting ourselves to just what we know in the agricultural college, because so much of this is coming out of engineering, it's coming out of biology, it's coming out of computer science. And we're looking at developments in those fields and saying, wow, where does that fit, in our world in ag? A really good example right now is what's going on in what we would call digital forestry, where they're putting to work some of these tools we've been using in crop ag for a while in this enormous issue of forest management, which the scale is just mind-boggling. But it's a good example of where some tools in one space, again, were put to work against a problem in another space. And so, Dave, I think there's a big focus on how input from industry and the stakeholder farmer, what the directives that come down from federal agencies and the problems that they're working on, your individual faculty expertise and their perspective on where things are going, and ultimately then that lines up with the college's priorities and then starts to move things forward. So anyway, and again, our role in many cases to take on something a little more speculative than the industry's going to do.
Okay. So when you look at that research, and I guess I look at research in a couple of different manners. One is the data and the statistics, and then there's also the
Exactly.
applicable usages of them. And I would say it's probably along the same lines that we've been talking about. It's whoever's taking the lead of the project, what direction does that research typically go? Because I think there's usefulness in both. I'm not saying that you should do one or the other. I think there's some usages in both, but what's that fine line when you look at that?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think, and again, to your point, the purpose of the research can span a lot of areas to where it may be some that's very applied, that's looking to inform a producer's decision next year. I mean, what do we know about planting dates, or what do we know about some particular crop nutrient practice? There's some of that kind of work. There's no question that's really important. The thing that's changed probably the most in the last decade, for sure here, is the focus on commercialization of university research in agriculture. And so there's been a big push here, Dave, and our previous president, in his mind, the highest level of engagement for a land-grant university was when a discovery found its way into the marketplace and could be in the hands of people who could use it. That was a real focus for him. So there's been a big focus here to take these ideas that next step and de-risk them, get them to a place that a company could acquire them, could license them, could develop them further into an idea that ultimately becomes useful to society. So that's been a pretty big shift for us in the last decade, and a lot of focus on that. And I think that's been a role that we didn't play as much more than a decade ago. But I think now, as more and more companies, as you well know, are looking to, they're in the more of the acquire and development idea than they are research and develop. So anyway, so I think that might be one thing I'd throw out there.
I worked for one of them, so.
Jay, that leads into probably a couple questions. So this may be totally off the rails here, but when you guys are doing your research, do you ever engage with FFA students, Future Farmers of America in high school, to have them in the classroom do some very basic research, engage with them to, number one, it's sort of a shameless recruiting tactic, right? But do you ever do anything with them to engage with them, kind of show them what you do, how you do it, and then get them involved?
Yeah, so we certainly have some summer programs, and we've been fortunate here. Of course, they hold the state FFA convention on campus, which is fantastic. And then we're only 70 miles from the national convention, so we end up getting hundreds of students that come in for the national convention to campus for short-term types of things, Doug. So there's definitely some of that. Where I would say we see even more of it, though, is once they're on campus, because the beauty of the land-grant model, when it really works, is when you bleed these things across areas. And so undergraduate research is a very big deal here. So a lot of our students are going to participate in some form of research while they're an undergrad, get their feet wet with that whole process. Some of them might go on for grad school, but others are going to go into companies, but they're going to have some of that experience. So I think, to your point, it's one, I mean, anything we can do to help connect with that student that's potential comes to a campus and get them excited about careers in ag is important. And then two, when they're on the campus, we certainly try to get them engaged in research so that they have an opportunity to better understand that and see if that's something you want to do long term.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yep. And then so here I am. I have some questions on data. How do we find your data? What is there something that sticks out?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that, I mean, I think in the end we I don't know, we need to be better at, and I think that's not a criticism just of us, but it's just it was always a frustration in ag. And I think even for our ag community, there would always be good work here and trying to cut through the noise, as you folks talked about in an earlier podcast, and get it in people's hands. I think is not a small task, but one, so much more of this is, of course, available digitally than it was. So groups on our campus, like our Center for Commercial Ag, are a really nice place to go for kind of a one-stop shop for everything that we're talking about related to policy, regulatory environment, trade, et cetera. in the department that it fits and impacts a commercial farmer. You can do the same thing with, I mean, farmers know who their expert agronomist is, and folks anymore usually have really good websites, that are available. And so I think there's definitely some work you've got to do if you're looking for that information, and we're not as we'd like to be more and more transparent all the time. At the same time, I think so much more is available digitally than it once was, which makes it easier to access. So not a great answer, but I think it's one there's a lot of focus on today, is trying to get this stuff out there. To your point, Dave, it's not helpful until it's in somebody's hands that can use it.
Well, and I think the other thing that you guys do so well, because I'm on the distribution list, is all of the conferences that you hold as well. And I've attended some of those, and I mean, if you're ready to learn something, those are great places. And I'm not saying Purdue's the only one that does it by any way, shape, but being able to really look at, seeing what that research does. You guys did, basically what does the farmer want type of conference that I attended a few years ago. And it really gives you that perspective, and the research you guys did was fantastic of giving that perspective, so that whether you're a retailer, whether you were an equipment dealership, it didn't matter what segment of agriculture you were dealing in, it gave you a perspective that really helped fulfill the needs of those growers. And I think that's really the big part of it, kind of, in conjunction with the extension. You have that local extension agent that can be that source. You can go ask the question, and if they don't know, they can find it for you.
Exactly.
So, but also then, we all know that by going to a conference, it's not just what you learn when you're sitting in the seat, it's what you learn when you're, on the breaks and having coffee. And having that interaction, you gain a lot more of a network there. So
absolutely. Well, and I'm glad you mentioned the educator, because I mean, they obviously have an important role. Different states, that's evolved into different models, but here every county's got an educator, and that person can be, one, the answer, or two, the conduit. And I think, for those that again are looking at personal contact, that's available. But and your point about conferences is spot on. And I think now, of course, a lot of those we can make available digitally as well. And I remember a conversation with a farmer out of state, but they were interested in a particular session. So they gathered in the farm shop where they had a monitor. They watched the presentation. They talked about it as a farm team and went back about the business. I mean, that's just the kind of thing that you can do today that you couldn't used to do, that once was not possible. And so I think those events still have their place, and it's an important place, in terms of sharing information that helps people think, broadly about where things are going.
Well, and I'm gonna jump back to a comment you made a little bit ago about, the different departments within the university and gleaning accessibility for, usages, projects, whatever the case may be. And one of them that I was on a project that they were asking about what a dealership of the future looked like. And of course, autonomy is the big conversation for especially the equipment companies. And one of the examples that I use is the starships there on Purdue's campus, and they're on multiple campuses. And everybody, I'll admit I was one of them. That, okay, autonomy is a very iffy thing, because you are looking at a field is a living thing. It changes. You may have a tile blowout. There's a lot of things that can happen. And when you put something out there with nobody there to see it, was always a big concern of mine. And and I'm giving you my opinion. There's take it for what it's worth. But it was really cool when starships started appearing on the college campuses, in this case Purdue's, and watching them. And sitting back and really watching and seeing how they navigate, and especially on Purdue's campus with all of the construction, take that into account. So everything changes. And then you also have students, traffic, all of the changing things. In essence, it's a living thing. And to see how it navigates it pretty well. So all of the things people have taken into the research, into the development of those types of tools really plays well in moving over into a field and
Yep.
how that changes.
No, I think it's a great example of, that particular technology in action. And I think your point, I mean, we do learn from other industries and other applications, and we should be, adopting the ones. And then it cuts both ways. Things we learn in agriculture, of course, again, find their way into other places too, because boy, the world's pretty hungry for technology. And if there's an application, somebody's going to explore it and see if there's, again, an opportunity there. So I think, yeah, it's a great example of again, that in action and people seeing it and saying, well, hey, there could be something here.
Yeah. Well,
Jay, I was going to ask on that real quick. What do you see, like, as you look forward in agriculture, what do you see as the threats and the opportunities?
Yeah, so I don't know, it's always an important question, and so and Dave would know this, but drilled into my head here is the notion of drivers, have changed from Mike Bulgy, because so many of these things cut both ways. They're both threats and opportunities, you both know, and I think the broader set of those factors is probably pretty clear. It's a question of how are they going to play out, and sometimes we forget, population as a driver, but 8 billion people still growing, not as fast as we were, and incomes changing and increasing, diet shifts, that matters. And sometimes we don't talk about as much lately because we haven't had as much maybe issue more recently, but it's always there. I mean, you folks have talked about, I know you both have talked about climate change, climate mitigation. That's huge for this industry. And again, it touches almost everything we're thinking about, whether it's, a new policy or a practice by a company that impacts production practices on the farm, or regulations, it's risk mitigation of a changing climate on the farm. I mean, it's new opportunities perhaps to earn, again, revenue on the farm by being a participant in climate mitigation. So that whole area is one that I think is huge. And then, of course, the whole consumer demand area and where younger generations are taking their food consumption practices. I mean, you've talked on your show before about plant-based meat, clean meats, et cetera. Some of that's going to happen. How big a deal will it be is the biggest question, of course, but it's there. And then the last one is just, not last one, but another huge one is just technology. And I mean, again, I don't need to tell you two because you're experts in the area, but and it gets cliche, but I believe in the last decade, we've just seen more technology being infused into this marketplace than we've ever seen before. And so many experiments now with startups looking to push the edges in every phase of ag, and so much digital technology coming on board, moving the genetics and the biological developments forward. And then all the things around mechanization and autonomy and robotics. I mean, it's a convergence of an incredible set of things, and there's a lot to monitor right now because some of this is not going to play out. Some of it's going to play out over a much longer time, and some of it could move pretty quickly. But those are 3 or 4 of the buckets that I guess I'm thinking about and trying to pay attention to in terms of what they're going to mean longer term for food and ag.
Excellent. Fantastic. Well, again, we really appreciate your time and your wisdom for us. It's fun to be able to say that because you've been so practical over the years that I've known you, and it's not just the academia. It is how do we take this and make it work, and I really appreciate that.